Games Workshop doesn't traffic in coincidences. Every mythological parallel woven into Warhammer 40,000 exists with purpose, every symbolic reference building towards something larger than itself. When you track the Norse mythology threads running through Leman Russ's storyline, when you notice the Hindu epic patterns echoing in Jagatai Khan's fate, when you see how Constantin Valdor mirrors Baldr the Bright down to the golden armor in the name itself, you start to realize these aren't just thematic flourishes, they're prophecies written in the language of myth. What follows is speculation, but it's speculation built on a foundation of deliberate mythological architecture that Games Workshop has been constructing for years. Leman Russ will return from the warp transformed, no longer the impulsive Thor figure who burned Prospero in rage, but as an Odin-like allfather bearing the spear the Emperor showed him in vision. He'll be missing an eye, having sacrificed it for knowledge, just as Odin hung from Yggdrasil and Magnus lost his to Tzeentch's schemes. Two figures will accompany him as the spiritual and physical advisors, completing the Odin parallel of Hugin and Munin, the two ravens that serve the Norse Allfather. One will be Corvus Corax, who already saved Russ's life once at Yarent, and whose entire identity revolves around the Raven. The other will be Janus, first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, born from the fusion of Ravul Arida and Magnus's nobility shard. A man whose personal signal was a raven, and who carries with him the very essence of Magnus's regret. Constantin Valdor, the Emperor's golden firstborn who wields the Apollonian spear to Russ's Dionysian, will mirror Baldur's role in Norse mythology. His death will trigger the Wolftime, the space wolves named for Ragnarok, setting in motion the end times that will determine the galaxy's fate. The trickster who arranges this could be Tzeentch, using Valdor's heroism against him, or it could be Cegorach, the laughing god of the Eldar, who's been manipulating events across the galaxy in service of a much larger plan. Which brings us to Jaghatai Khan. The Warhawk went into the Webway pursuing Dark Eldar and never came back. But what if he didn't just get lost? What if Cegorach found him? The Khan has been training with the Harlequins, learning their techniques, studying in the Black Library, preparing to become the Eldar God's champion. When he returns, he'll embody Hanuman from the Ramayana, the White Monkey, the Monkey King, the supreme destroyer of evil. A philosopher warrior known for supernatural speed and laughing while he kills, which already describes the Khan and his legion's entire ethos. The duel between Fulgrim and Jagatai that was promised at the triumph of Ullanor will finally happen, and when the Khan defeats Slaanesh's champion, it will advance Cegorach's plan to alter the Rana Dadra, the Eldar end times, so that Slaanesh becomes the sacrifice rather than the devourer. These storylines aren't separate, they converge. The Wolftime, Ragnarok, and the Rana Dadra are the same event viewed through different cultural lenses. The moment when everything burns so it can be reborn. What follows is an examination of the evidence, the mythological parallels, and the narrative threads that all point towards this conclusion. Leman Russ has always been draped in Norse mythology. His homeworld of Fenris is a frozen death world populated by clans that live and die by Viking codes. The Space Wolves themselves are organized around Norse cultural touchstones, from the wolf imagery to the mead halls to the sagas that record their greatest deeds. But for most of the Great Crusade and the Heresy, Russ embodied Thor rather than Odin. He was the berserker god, quick to anger and quicker to fight, preferring action to contemplation and violence to wisdom. His weapon during this period was a sword called Mjolnir, not a subtle reference to Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, reforged as a blade for the Wolf King. Russ was the Emperor's executioner, the Primarch you sent when someone needed to be put down without mercy or hesitation. He burned Prospero not because he wanted to, but because he believed it was his duty, his role in the grand design. 2 missing legions presumably fell to his hand during the Great Crusade, though those records remain sealed. Russ killed for the Emperor the way Thor killed giants for Asgard. The novel Wolfsbane depicts Russ returning to Fenris after the mauling at Prospero, after losing so many of his sons to Magnus's sorcery, after realizing that blind obedience to the Emperor's orders led him to commit an atrocity he can never undo. He's drinking himself into oblivion, mourning and raging at fate. Then the Emperor appears to him in a vision, though whether it's truly the Emperor or something else remains ambiguous. What matters is what the vision shows him: a golden spear, perfect and powerful, a weapon that transforms its wielder into something greater than a warrior. Russ understands in that moment that he's been playing the wrong archetype. He's been Thor when the galaxy needed him to be Odin, the executioner when it needed the king, the weapon when it needed the general. He discards Mjolnir and takes up a new weapon, a golden spear that serves as his Gungnir, Odin's spear from Norse mythology, the weapon that never misses its target. Whether the text explicitly names it Gungnir, or whether that's the interpretation readers draw from the obvious parallel doesn't matter. The symbolism is unmistakable. All of this isn't exactly subtle. This is Games Workshop putting a neon sign over Russ's head that says, "This character is becoming Odin." The transformation from Thor to Odin, from impulsive warrior to wise king, is one of the most important arcs in Norse mythology, and Wolfsbane makes it explicit that Russ is following the same path. After the Siege of Terra, after watching the Emperor get entombed on the Golden Throne, after seeing Horus die and the dream of the Imperium curdle into bureaucratic nightmare, Russ returns to Fenris a changed Primarch. The Space Wolves omnibus describes him as quiet, brooding, and drinking but without joy. He's mourning not just his brothers, but the future they were supposed to build together. The weight of his failure sits on him like a physical burden. Then he receives a vision. The lore doesn't specify its content, but immediately afterwards, Russ announces he's leaving. He gives his famous Wolftime speech to the Space Wolves, promising to return when the galaxy needs him most, when the end times come and the final battle must be fought. Then he departs into the Eye of Terror with his personal guard, and only the Wolfen of the 13th who eventually return have any idea what happened next. According to the Space Wolves omnibus and related lore, Russ is searching for something called the Tree of Life. In Norse mythology, the Tree of Life is Yggdrasil, the World Tree, the cosmic axis around which all 9 realms revolve. Its roots reach into different worlds, its branches support the heavens, and in its base sits the Well of Mimir, where Odin sacrificed his eye for wisdom. The most famous story about Odin and Yggdrasil involves sacrifice. Odin wanted to learn the secrets of the runes, the fundamental language of magic and fate in Norse cosmology. To gain this knowledge, he hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, essentially sacrificing himself to himself. He died and was reborn with the wisdom he sought. Additionally, he gave up one of his eyes by casting it into Mimir's well, trading physical sight for metaphysical insight. If Games Workshop is following the mythological template, and every piece of evidence suggests they are, then Russ's quest for the Tree of Life won't be a simple treasure hunt. It will be a crucible that transforms him at the deepest level. He'll find what he's looking for, but the cost will be extreme. He'll have to make the same sacrifice Odin made, giving up part of himself to gain the knowledge he needs. But what knowledge is Russ seeking? What could be worth sacrificing an eye, or potentially much more? The answer seems obvious: the knowledge of how to restore the Emperor. Not whether it can be done, but the specific method, the exact steps, the terrible price that must be paid. Russ isn't just wandering the warp hoping to stumble across a solution. He's pursuing a specific goal that requires him to find Yggdrasil's equivalent in the Immaterium, and pay the same price Odin paid. The relationship between Leman Russ and Magnus the Red is one of the most complex in all of Warhammer 40,000. They're opposites in almost every way. Russ is physical, straightforward, and distrustful of psychers. Magnus is intellectual, subtle, and devoted to sorceress research. Russ burns books, Magnus hoards them. During the Council of Nicaea, Russ argued for restricting psychers while Magnus defended their use. The conflict between them feels ancient and inevitable, 2 forces that were always going to collide. Yet they're also mirrors of each other. Both are the Emperor's tools designed for specific purposes. Both are defined by their most catastrophic failures. Both destroy what they love most while trying to save it. Magnus broke the Webway and doomed the Emperor's great work because he was trying to warn his father about Horus's betrayal. Russ burned Prospero and slaughtered thousands of Magnus's sons because he believed he was following the Emperor's will. They're tragic figures whose flaws lead them to commit irreversible mistakes. The Thousand Sun novels establish that Magnus made a deal with Tzeentch to save his legion from the flesh change. the mutation that was destroying them. He didn't realize the true cost of this bargain until it was too late, until Tzeentch had woven hooks so deep into his soul that escape became impossible. Magnus lost an eye as part of these dealings with the Changer of Ways, though the exact circumstances vary depending on which account you read. What's consistent is that Magnus traded part of himself for forbidden knowledge and power, and Tzeentch made sure the price kept accumulating. Their fates are bound together. They're locked in a cycle of violence and revenge that spans 10,000 years. So, if the lore is positioning them as mirrors, as two sides of the same tragic coin, then it follows that what Magnus did, Russ will also do. Magnus made a deal with Tzeentch to save his sons. Russ will make a deal with Tzeentch to save his father. The irony would be exquisite, and Tzeentch loves irony above all else. The executioner of Prospero, the Primarch who destroyed the City of Light and damned Magnus to chaos, coming to Tzeentch for the same forbidden knowledge that Magnus sought. The man who burned libraries full of dangerous lore now seeking that exact kind of dangerous lore for himself. Tzeentch, god of paradox and contradiction, would absolutely accept this bargain. The great schemer would see the poetry in it. Russ would find the Tree of Life in the warp. He'd learn what he needs to know to restore the Emperor, but Tzeentch would demand payment, an eye matching both Odin's sacrifice and Magnus's loss. Maybe more than an eye, maybe pieces of his soul, shaved away bit by bit until Russ stands on the edge of damnation, just like his brother before him. A crucial difference exists between Magnus and Russ in this scenario. Magnus fell because he was alone, because no one intervened, because by the time anyone realized how deep Tzeentch's hooks went in, it was too late to pull him back. Russ won't be alone. Two figures will reach him before he crosses the final threshold, before the deal is sealed and his soul is forfeit. Two ravens will save the Wolf King from himself. In Norse mythology, Odin is called the Raven God. Two ravens accompany him everywhere, Hugin, which is thought, and Munin, which is memory. Each morning they fly out across the 9 realms observing everything, gathering information. Each evening they return to Odin and tell him what they've seen. They're his spies, his scouts, and his advisors. They warn him of dangers and guide him towards wisdom. Odin fears losing them, particularly Munin, because a king without memory is just a man with a crown. The symbolism of the raven in Warhammer 40,000 runs deeper than most people realize. The Imperial Aquila, the two-headed eagle that represents the Imperium itself, bears a striking resemblance to a double raven when you look at it from certain angles. The spread wings, the proud heads, the sense of watching and judging. Ravens are associated with Tzeentch, with secrets and prophecy, with seeing what others cannot. They're liminal creatures that exist between life and death, between truth and deception. If Russ becomes Odin, then he needs his ravens. Odin already has his wolves, Freki and Guri, representing hunger and greed, mirrored perfectly by the space wolves themselves with their barely controlled ferocity and pack tactics. But the ravens are missing. Games Workshop has positioned two candidates perfectly, both already in the warp, both with strong thematic and narrative connections to Russ, both carrying the raven symbolism. Let's start with the obvious choice, Corvus Corax, Primarch of the Raven Guard, literally named after ravens. Corvus means raven in Latin. Corax comes from the Greek Corax, also meaning raven. His entire identity revolves around the raven, his legion symbol, his aesthetics, his tactics. Ravens scout and observe before striking, just like the Raven Guard. Ravens are creatures of stealth and darkness, just like Corax himself. If you need someone to fill the role of Odin's Raven in 40K, Corax is the only logical choice. But the connection goes beyond just symbolism. Corax and Russ have genuine history, the kind of bond forged in the worst moments of the heresy. During the events of Slaves to Darkness, Russ attempted to assassinate Horus at the Battle of Trisolian, also called the Battle of Yarant in some sources. The plan was desperate, maybe suicidal, and certainly reckless in the old Thor-like Russ fashion. Russ led a strike force deep into the traitor lines, got close enough to wound Horus with the Spear of Russ, but the blow wasn't fatal. Horus's patron gods protected him, and the trap snapped shut. Russ and the survivors were pinned down, cut off, about to be overwhelmed. They would have died there if Corvus Corax hadn't arrived with Raven Guard reinforcements. Corax extracted Russ from the disaster, saving his life and the lives of his warriors. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of debt that stays with you. The kind of bond that transforms acquaintances into brothers. Before that moment, Russ and Corax apparently got along better than Russ did with most of his brothers. One of the Heresy novels mentions that Russ enjoyed sparring with Corax, that he respected the Ravenlord's approach to warfare in a way he didn't respect the methods of Primarchs like Guilliman or Dorn. Both Russ and Corax understood the necessity of wet work, of doing terrible things in the Emperor's name because someone had to do them. Both operated in moral gray areas despite their public personas. They weren't friends exactly, but they understood each other. After the Heresy, Corax retreated to the Warp to hunt Wordbearers. A short story depicting his hunt through the Eye of Terror shows him pursuing traitors through the Immaterium with single-minded fury. But he's not the same Corax who led the Raven Guard during the Great Crusade. The Warp has changed him, shaped him into something more than an ordinary Primarch. He's described as shadow-like, able to move through the Warp in ways that shouldn't be possible, killing with precision and ferocity that terrifies even Chaos Space Marines. So Corax is already in the Warp, already changed by it, and already operating in the same realm where Russ is searching for the Tree of Life. Ravens are scouts. They see what others miss. They fly high and observe from a distance before committing to action. If anyone could track Russ's movements through the Immaterium, if anyone could follow his trail to the Tree of Life, it would be Corax. Russ finds the Tree of Life. He's standing before it, about to make his bargain with Tzeentch, about to trade his eye and potentially his soul for the knowledge to save the Emperor. Then Corax arrives, stepping out of the shadows the way only he can. A confrontation unfolds. Maybe they fight demons together, back to back like they did at Yarent. Maybe they just talk, two broken Primarchs who have both lost too much, both sacrificed too much, and both seen their dreams turn to ashes. Corax stops Russ from completing the deal, not through force but through reason, through reminding Russ of what happened to Magnus, through showing him that some prices are too high even for the Emperor's restoration. Russ loses his eye anyway, the sacrifice Yggdrasil demands, but he doesn't lose his soul. He gains the knowledge but keeps himself intact. Corax becomes the first Raven, Hugin, Thought, the scout who sees danger before it arrives, the tactical advisor who spots threats and opportunities from a distance, the one who saved Russ's life at Yarent and now saves his soul at the Tree of Life. When they return from the Warp together, Corax will continue serving this role, watching the Imperium's enemies and reporting to the Allfather. From a meta perspective, this would make sense for Games Workshop, a dual Primarch release, the Wolf and the Raven returning together, both changed by their time in the Warp but still loyal to the Imperium. The marketing writes itself. The narrative payoff would be enormous, and it would complete half of the Odin parallel, giving Russ the first Raven. The second Raven is less obvious but even more important to the overall narrative. His name is Janus, and his story is one of the Heresy's most tragic arcs, a tale of redemption emerging from catastrophe. Janus began his existence as Revul Arvida, a Corvidae of the Thousand Sons. The Corvidae were the seer cult within Magnus's legion, psychers who specialized in divination and prophecy. Arvida's personal heraldry featured a raven, his chosen symbol even before Prospero burned. He was one of the few thousand sons who escaped the planet when Russ's fleet arrived, one of the survivors who witnessed the destruction of everything they'd built. The novel Scars and the short story Allegiance detail Arvida's time with the White Scars. He fights alongside them, bonds with them, particularly with Yasuge Jaghatai, the Legion's most powerful Stormseer. In a scene that resonates with symbolic weight, Yasuge gifts Arvida a new shoulder pauldron to replace the one he lost on Prospero. Yasuge personally carves Arvida's raven sigil into the armor, an act of brotherhood and acceptance. When Arvida sees the completed raven carving, he experiences a moment of recognition, a sense that this symbol is tied to his fate in ways he doesn't yet understand. He knows the raven will be important. He doesn't know how, but the feeling is undeniable. The story makes a point of highlighting this moment, giving it weight and significance, marking it as foreshadowing for something that will happen later. During the Siege of Terra, Arvida is dying. The flesh change, the mutation that destroyed so many thousand suns, is finally claiming him despite his resistance. His body is failing, his psychic power consuming him from the inside. He's dying alone, another casualty of a war that has already taken too much. Then Magnus does something unprecedented. Realizing that Tzeentch is trying to control him completely, to puppet him as a tool rather than allowing him autonomy, Magnus shatters himself. He breaks his soul into multiple shards and scatters them, a desperate gambit to maintain some independence. Most of these shards are aspects of Magnus's personality, his ambition, his rage, his sorcerous power, his pride. But the largest shard, the most powerful piece of Magnus, is his nobility, his conscience, the part of him that regrets his mistakes, that wished he'd made different choices, that represents everything good about Magnus before Tzeentch's corruption. The nobility shard finds Arvida. The two merge, saving Arvida's life but transforming him into something new. He's no longer purely human, no longer just an Astartes. He's part Primarch now, carrying Magnus's essence, his memories, and his regrets. He takes the name Janus and becomes the first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, the chapter founded to fight demons with incorruptible purpose. Janus is one of the most powerful psychers in Imperial history, combining Arvida's skill and Magnus's raw power. He helped establish the Grey Knights' traditions, train their first recruits, set the standards that would define the chapter for 10,000 years. Then he vanished from the historical record. Nobody knows what happened to him, where he went, whether he died or simply departed for parts unknown. Given his power level and the Primarch essence within him, it seems unlikely he's truly gone. The importance of Janus to the Russ theory cannot be overstated. If Russ is about to make Magnus's mistake, about to trade his soul to Tzeentch for forbidden knowledge, then who better to stop him than Magnus's nobility? The part of Magnus that regrets the deal, that understands the true cost, and wishes someone had intervened before it was too late. Janus would have every motivation to find Russ in the warp. He carries Magnus's memories, including everything that happened between the Wolf King and the Crimson King. He knows about Prospero from both sides, victim and aggressor. He understands Tzeentch's manipulations better than almost anyone, and part of him must want reconciliation between the wolves and what remains of the Thousand Sons. Must want to prove that Magnus's nobility can still accomplish good in the galaxy. So Janus goes looking for Russ. Maybe he's been searching for years, following visions and prophecies through the warp. Maybe he arrives at the Tree of Life at the exact moment Corax does. Either way, he intervenes before Russ can seal the bargain with Tzeentch. He warns the Wolf King about the Changer of Ways tricks, shares Magnus's bitter experience, shows Russ what the cost really means. He's the voice of spiritual wisdom, the guide who understands the Immaterium's dangers in ways even Corax cannot. Russ still sacrifices his eye. The Tree of Life still demands payment, but he doesn't lose his soul and doesn't become Tzeentch's puppet. He doesn't follow Magnus down the same path that ended with the Crimson King becoming a demon prince. And now he has his second raven, Munin, Memory. The one who remembers the past and its lessons. The one who carries the memories of Magnus's fall and can prevent it from happening again. Janus's role wouldn't end with saving Russ. As a Grey Knight, he's the perfect spiritual advisor for the returning Primarch. He understands demon slaying, warp navigation, and psychic combat. He can teach the Space Wolves how to fight the kinds of threats they'll face in the end times. He's the priest to Corax's warrior, the mystic to balance the tactician, the memory that complements the thought. Together, Corax and Janus complete the Odin parallel. They're Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, the two ravens who serve the Allfather. Both carry the raven symbol, both have saved Russ in different ways. Both bring different kinds of wisdom to guide him. With them at his side, Russ becomes truly Odin-like, the one-eyed king served by ravens who see what he cannot. But the Norse mythology parallel isn't complete with just Odin and his ravens. There's another critical figure, the Bright One, the golden sun whose death triggers Ragnarok itself. Valdor the Golden, Baldur's Mirror. The short story Two Metaphysical Blades should be required reading for anyone trying to understand where the Warhammer 40,000 narrative is heading. In it, the Emperor creates two spears as gifts for his greatest servants. But these aren't just weapons, they're philosophical statements, metaphysical principles given form, two halves of a conceptual whole. The first spear is named the Apollonian after Apollo, Greek god of the sun, truth, prophecy, and reason. The spear has a unique property. When it wounds someone, the wielder gains perfect knowledge of that person, their history, their truth, their essential nature. Everything about them becomes known. The spear was gifted to Constantin Valdor, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's firstborn, the first and greatest of the 10,000. The second spear is the Dionysian, named for Dionysus, great god of wine, ecstasy, madness, and chaos. This spear does the opposite of its twin. When it wounds someone, they experience their own truth, confronting themselves in a moment of forced self-recognition. They see themselves as they truly are, stripped of self-deception and comfortable lies. This spear went to Leman Russ. The Emperor explicitly tells his audience that the wielders of these spears represent opposite principles but complement each other. Valdor embodies order, discipline, and unwavering precision. He is the Apollonian principle personified, rational and controlled. Russ represents chaos, passion, and brutal honesty. He is pure Dionysian energy, wild and unpredictable. Together they form a complete whole, two necessary aspects of the Emperor's vision for humanity. But the most revealing part of the story comes after the heresy, after Horus's death, after the Emperor is interred on the Golden Throne. Valdor and Russ react to this catastrophe in completely opposite ways, true to their natures. Valdor remains calm, collected, certain that everything is unfolding according to the Emperor's design. Even this disaster must be part of the plan. His faith never wavers. Russ, by contrast, rages. He returns to Fenris and drinks himself into oblivion, mourning his brothers, blaming himself for Horus's fall, questioning everything. Then something changes. Both of them receive a vision at roughly the same time. The story doesn't describe what they see, but the impact is immediate and profound. Both leave their positions without explaining where they're going or why. Russ announces his departure in typical fashion. He gives the Wolftime speech to his legion, promising to return when the galaxy needs him most. He holds a massive feast, drinks and laughs with his sons one final time, then departs into the Eye of Terror with his wolf guard. At least he says goodbye. Valdor leaves without telling anyone. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guardian, simply vanishes. His last recorded words are whispered to the Emperor's sarcophagus, only in death. The beginning of the Custodian's oath, but he doesn't finish it. Then he's gone, leaving the Apollonian spear behind. The implication is unmistakable. They saw the same vision. They both understood what needs to be done. They're both searching for the same thing, a way to restore the Emperor. They're working in parallel, approaching the problem from different angles. The Apollonian and the Dionysian pursuing the same goal through opposite methods. In Norse mythology, Baldr is one of Odin's sons and Thor's brother. He's called Baldr the Bright, Baldr the Beautiful, Baldr the Good. He's the god of light, purity, and beauty, described as golden and radiant. He's beloved by all the Aesir, the closest thing Norse mythology has to a purely good character. He represents everything noble and pure in the pantheon, untouched by the violence and treachery that define most Norse myths. The parallels to Constantin Valdor are impossible to miss once you see them. Valdor wears golden armor. He's the Emperor's firstborn, the perfect creation, the template for all custodians who came after. He wielded the Apollonian spear, named after another sun god, another deity of light and truth. He represents order, purity, unwavering purpose. He is, in every meaningful sense, golden. Even the names echo each other. Valdor, Baldor. The phonetic similarity is too precise to be coincidence. Games Workshop doesn't do accidental name parallels, especially not with characters this important. But matching the Norse myth doesn't mean matching the character traits. It also means matching the narrative role, and Baldr's role in Norse mythology is to die at the worst possible moment and thereby trigger the end of the world. The story of Baldr's death is one of the most famous Norse myths. Baldr begins having prophetic dreams of his own death. The gods, terrified of losing him, makes everything in existence swear an oath not to harm him. Everything agrees: weapons, stones, trees, diseases, animals, everything. They overlook only one thing: mistletoe, which seems too young and weak to pose any threat. Loki, the trickster god, discovers this loophole. He fashions a spear or arrow from mistletoe and tricks Hodr, Baldr's blind brother, into throwing it at Baldr during what was supposed to be a game. The mistletoe pierces Baldr and kills him instantly, the only thing in all creation that could harm him. The gods are devastated. They try everything to bring Baldr back from hell, the Norse underworld. They almost succeed, but Loki sabotages their efforts again. Baldr remains dead, and his death marks the beginning of the end. The chains that bind Fenrir, the wolf monster, begin to weaken. The fires of Muspelheim grow hotter. Ragnarok approaches, inevitable now that the brightest of the gods has fallen. In Warhammer 40,000, the Space Wolves call the end times the Wolftime. It's the period where Leman Russ will return, when the final battle will be fought, and when the galaxy will burn so it can be reborn. They've been waiting for it since Russ left, maintaining their vigil, preparing for the war to come. The Wolftime is Ragnarok by another name, filtered through the Space Wolves' cultural lens. If Games Workshop is following the mythological template with Russ as Odin, then they need someone to play Baldr's role, someone golden and pure whose death will trigger the end times. Someone beloved whose fall will mark the point of no return. The moment when everything changes and the final war becomes inevitable. Constantin Valdor fits perfectly. He's golden, he's the brightest of the Emperor's servants. He's searching for a way to save the Emperor, just as Russ is, making him part of the same narrative. And if he dies in that attempt, if the Golden Guardian falls before completing his quest, then the Wolftime begins. The Space Wolves' prophecies come true. Russ returns because Valdor's death proves the end times have started. If Valdor is Baldr, then someone must play Loki's role. Someone must be the trickster who arranges his death, using his virtue against him, finding the loophole that makes the unkillable vulnerable. In 40K there are two obvious candidates, both trickster deities in their own right, both deeply involved in the events unfolding across the galaxy. The first possibility is Tzeentch, the architect of fate, the great conspirator, the god who plots within plots within plots. If Valdor dies trying to stop Russ from sealing a bargain with Tzeentch, that would mirror the Norse myth precisely. Valdor intervenes to save Russ, motivated by the same purity and dedication that defines his entire existence. But in doing so, he exposes himself, becomes vulnerable, gives Tzeentch an opening. Tzeentch arranges for Valdor's death, using his heroism against him. The brightest light in the Imperium extinguished by the darkest schemer in the warp. The irony would be exquisite. Valdor sought to save the Emperor and prevent Russ from falling. Instead, his death triggers the very catastrophe he was trying to prevent, setting off the Wolftime and plunging the galaxy into war. The second possibility is Cegorach, the laughing god of the Eldar. This seems less obvious at first, but becomes more plausible the more you examine the evidence. Cegorach is explicitly a trickster deity, the Eldar equivalent of Loki. He survived the fall of the Eldar by being clever and unpredictable. He's been manipulating events behind the scenes for 10,000 years, working towards goals that only he understands. If Valdor's death serves Cegorach's plan to bring about the Rana Dandra and defeat Slaanesh, then the Laughing God might arrange it. Not out of malice, but out of cold calculation. Cegorach needs the end times to happen so he can trigger his altered prophecy. Valdor's death could be the spark that ignites everything, the domino that starts the cascade that leads to Slaanesh's defeat. Cegorach might sacrifice Valdor knowing the Golden Guardian's death will bring Russ back, which will set other events in motion, which will eventually lead to the confrontation Cegorach has been engineering. The Laughing God has been exceptionally active in recent lore, and his machinations directly involve multiple Primarchs. Which brings us to the final piece of this theory, Jaghatai Khan and his transformation into Hanuman. If you're not deeply familiar with Hindu mythology, Hanuman might not be a name you recognize immediately. But he's one of the most important figures in the Ramayana, one of the two great Indian epics, a work as foundational to Hindu culture as the Iliad and Odyssey are to the Western civilizations. Hanuman is the monkey god, divine warrior, loyal servant of the Lord Rama. He's called the White Monkey, the Monkey King, and the supreme destroyer of evil. He embodies a fascinating combination of traits, part scholar and part warrior with supernatural combat abilities, part trickster who delights in pranks and clever solutions. Hanuman is famous for his speed above all else. In one famous scene from the Ramayana, he leaps from India to Sri Lanka in a single bound, crossing hundreds of miles of ocean. He moves faster than thought, striking before enemies can react. He's a master of martial arts, particularly fighting with a mace and bare hands. And critically, he's known for laughing during battle, finding joy in combat, treating war as a game to be won with skill and clever tactics. Does any of this sound familiar? It should, because it perfectly describes Jaghatai Khan and his white scars. The Khan is the fastest of all Primarchs. The white scars built their entire combat doctrine around speed and mobility, striking like lightning and disappearing before the enemy can mount an effective response. They're known throughout the Imperium for their hit-and-run tactics, their lightning warfare, their ability to appear seemingly out of nowhere. Speed defines them more than any other trait. The White Scars Legion motto is "Laugh while you're killing," not exactly subtle. They find joy in battle, humor in death, and victory in movement and precision. They treat warfare as an art form, appreciating elegant solutions and clever tactics. This matches Hanuman's characterization perfectly. The warrior who fights with joy rather than grim determination, who sees beauty in combat and laughs as he destroys evil. The Khan is also a philosopher warrior, a rare combination in the Primarch lineup. He writes poetry, he contemplates the nature of loyalty, freedom, and duty. He understands warfare as something deeper than just killing efficiently. This intellectual dimension mirrors Hanuman's role as a scholar warrior, someone who studied the sacred texts and can quote them even while fighting demons. But the most compelling evidence for the Khan as Hanuman theory comes not from character parallels, but from examining what actually happened during the scattering, and what's been happening with the Eldar ever since. The scattering is one of the most important events in Warhammer 40,000 history. The Emperor created 20 Primarchs in his secret laboratory beneath the Himalayan mountains, infant demigods designed to lead humanity's conquest of the galaxy. Before he could finish their development, chaos intervened. The ruinous powers opened a warp rift, seized the infant Primarchs, and scattered them across the galaxy. Each Primarch landed on a different world, grew up in wildly different circumstances, developed into very different kinds of leaders. The standard narrative is that chaos controlled the scattering completely, placing each Primarch deliberately to corrupt them or at least ensured they'd be useful to Chaos's plans eventually. But in Fury of Magnus, Magnus makes a statement that completely upends this assumption. He claims that during the scattering, 2 Primarchs were supposed to land on each other's worlds. Jagatai Khan was meant for Chemos, and Fulgrim was meant for Cegorach. Chemos was an industrial nightmare world, a planet devoted entirely to manufacturing, where perfection was demanded in every product and failure meant death. It produced the Fulgrim we know, obsessed with perfection, driven to improve every aspect of himself and his legion, ultimately vulnerable to Slaanesh's promise of ultimate excellence. A Jaghatai Khan raised on Chemos would have been radically different, probably not the free-spirited steppe warrior we know. "What are you doing, steppe warrior?" Sorry, I couldn't resist. Cegorach was the opposite, a plains world where nomadic tribes lived free, where speed and movement defined power, where individual freedom was valued above rigid order. It produced the Khan we know, the philosopher warrior who values liberty and mobility. A Fulgrim raised on Cegorach would have become something very different from the perfectionist we got. Probably someone incompatible with Slaanesh's ethos of excess. But according to Magnus, something intervened during the scattering. Not the Emperor, who was still trying to recover his sons. Not the Chaos Gods who had launched the scattering in the first place. A third party altered their trajectories, swapping the Khan and Fulgrim's destinations. Magnus doesn't identify this third party, but the implications point to Cegorach, the laughing god of the Eldar. Consider the facts. Cegorach is the elder god of trickery, deception, and manipulation. He exists partially outside normal space-time, able to see the skein of fate and alter it through clever inventions. He survived the fall of the Eldar when most of the rest of the Pantheon died, saved by his unpredictability and cunning. And he has one overwhelming motivation: destroy Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, the god that murdered his entire Pantheon and now tortures Eldar souls for eternity. Fulgrim becomes Slaanesh's chosen champion, the Primarch who embodies everything Slaanesh values. But what if Slaanesh's first choice was actually the Khan? What if the plan was for Jagatai to land on Chemos, be shaped by its culture of perfection and excess, and eventually fall to Slaanesh as the perfect champion of the Prince of Pleasure? Cegorach would have seen this in the skein of fate. He would have seen Slaanesh getting its perfect champion. would have seen how that strengthened the Dark Prince, so he intervened. He altered the scattering, swapping 2 Primarchs' destinations. He denied Slaanesh its first choice and ensured the Khan would grow up in a way that made him fundamentally incompatible with Slaanesh's philosophy. Freedom versus excess, movement versus stagnation, liberation versus enslavement. The Khan's entire worldview opposes everything Slaanesh represents. By doing this, Cegorach didn't just deny Slaanesh a champion, he created his own counter-champion, a piece positioned perfectly for the endgame Cegorach has been planning for 10,000 years. After the Siege of Terra ended, Jagatai Khan pursued a Dark Eldar raiding party into the Webway. That's the last confirmed sighting of him. The official story, as much as there is one, suggests he's still in there somewhere, fighting an eternal guerrilla war against the Drukhari, unable to find his way out of the labyrinth dimension. But what if that's not the complete truth? What if the Khan found something else in the Webway, or more accurately, what if something found him? The Webway is Cegorach's domain more than anyone else's. The Black Library, repository of all forbidden Eldar knowledge, exists somewhere within its tunnels. The Harlequins, Cegorach's chosen servants, use the Webway as their primary means of travel, appearing and disappearing across the galaxy through its hidden paths. If Cegorach wanted to find the Khan, the Webway is exactly where he'd do it. If Cegorach wanted to recruit the Khan, to train him, to prepare him for a specific role, the Webway would be the perfect location. The theory is this: Jagatai Khan has been training with the Harlequins for the past 10,000 years. He's been learning their techniques, their philosophy, their way of warfare. He's been studying in the Black Library, gaining access to knowledge that no other Primarch possesses. He's been preparing for his role as Cegorach's champion in the coming conflict between the Imperium and Chaos, specifically in the confrontation with Slaanesh. The synergy would be perfect. The Harlequins are the fastest warriors in the entire galaxy, bar none. They move like lightning given form, striking from impossible angles, killing with horrifying precision before vanishing back into the shadows. They're masters of acrobatics, of misdirection, of treating warfare as performance art. And critically, they laugh while they fight. They find joy in combat, humor in death, victory in elegant execution. They embody exactly the same philosophy as the White Scars. Now imagine the Khan, already the fastest Primarch, already a master of mobility-based warfare, learning Harlequin techniques for 10,000 years. His swordsmanship, already legendary, would reach levels that surpass even demon Primarchs. His speed would become truly supernatural, moving faster than even enhanced eyes can track. His tactical acumen, already formidable, would be enhanced by Eldar strategic wisdom accumulated over millions of years. And he'd still be laughing. The Khan wouldn't lose himself in Harlequin training. He'd remain himself but elevated, his natural gifts enhanced rather than replaced. He'd still be Jagatai Khan of Cegorach, still be the Warhawk, still embody the White Scar's ethos of freedom and joy in battle. But now he'd have techniques and knowledge that no other Primarch can match. The transformation fits the Hanuman parallel perfectly. In the Ramayana, Hanuman doesn't start out as the most powerful warrior. He grows into that role through training, dedication, and divine blessing. He studies under the gods themselves, learning martial arts and spiritual wisdom. When he finally unleashes his full power, he's unstoppable, the supreme destroyer of evil, the warrior who can defeat any demon or monster. The Khan has been receiving similar training from Cegorach and the Harlequins, becoming the weapon needed to strike at Slaanesh's heart. But striking at Slaanesh directly is impossible for a mortal, even a Primarch. So instead, the Khan needs to defeat Slaanesh's champion. He needs to fight Fulgrim. The Ranadandra is the Eldar version of Ragnarok, their end times prophecy, the final battle that will determine their race's fate. The name itself echoes the Ramayana, the great Hindu epic where Hanuman plays a central role, suggesting that Games Workshop deliberately built mythological parallels between the Eldar prophecy and the ancient Indian tradition. For millions of years, this prophecy has been fixed and immutable. Slaanesh will devour what remains of the Eldar race. The Prince of Pleasure will hunt down every Eldar soul, torturing them for eternity in the warp. The prophecy is brutal, final, and absolute. But in the 8th edition Harlequin Codex, Games Workshop revealed something that changes everything. Cegorach has altered the prophecy. The laughing god, using his unique position outside normal causality, has rewritten the ending of the Ranadandra. Now, instead of the Eldar being destroyed by Slaanesh, the prophecy concludes with Slaanesh being tricked into sacrificing itself to save the Eldar. The ultimate reversal. The predator becoming the prey. The devourer being devoured. Ever since discovering this altered prophecy, the Harlequins have been working behind the scenes to make it come true. They've been manipulating events across the entire galaxy, nudging key figures towards specific outcomes, arranging circumstances so that when the Ranadandra finally happens, Cegorach's new ending becomes reality rather than just a possibility. The evidence for this manipulation is extensive. Consider Siandri Veilwalker, one of the most powerful Harlequin shadow seers who keeps appearing in major storylines across recent lore. In Rise of the Primarchs, she plays a direct role in resurrecting Reboot Guilliman. She helps arrange the circumstances that allow Yvraine to bring him back from the brink of death, ensuring that the Imperium gains a functional leader for the first time in 10,000 years. Later in the same campaign, she helps trap Magnus in the Webway, preventing the Crimson King from achieving his objectives and limiting Tzeentch's influence. In Clone Lord, she manipulates Fabius Bile into creating a perfect clone of Fulgrim, completely uncorrupted by chaos. Then she ensures that the clone ends up with Trazyn the Infinite's collection, preserved and protected for some future purpose that only Cegorach understands. In Devastation of Baal, she foils Kabanda's plan to corrupt the Blood Angels and their successor chapters. The Bloodthirster was trying to turn one of the Imperium's most important Astartes lineages to Khorne, which would have been a devastating blow. Veilwalker prevents this, ensuring the Blood Angels remain loyal. The pattern is undeniable. The Harlequins are working to resurrect or preserve loyalist Primarchs while preventing chaos from gaining major victories. They're setting pieces on the board, arranging the playing field, preparing for the final confrontation that will determine whether Cegorach's altered prophecy comes true. And the key to defeating Slaanesh, the critical moves that makes everything else possible. Defeating Slaanesh's champion, which means the Khan must fight Fulgrim and win. Cegorach has been preparing the Khan for exactly this purpose, training him to be the warrior capable of striking down the Phoenician, weakening Slaanesh enough so that the altered prophecy can take effect. The triumph of Ullanor was meant to be the Imperium's greatest moment. The Emperor had conquered the Orc Empire, the largest threat to humanity's expansion. He gathered his Primarchs, his generals, his greatest heroes for a massive celebration. He elevated Horus to War Master, naming him the commander of the entire Great Crusade. It should have been pure victory, the high point of the Imperium's expansion. But beneath the celebrations, tensions simmered. One particular significant moment involved Fulgrim and Jaghatai Khan. They had words. Fulgrim made it clear that he considered himself the superior swordsman, the more refined warrior, the perfectionist who had mastered combat in ways that the barbarous Khan never could. The Khan disagreed, politely but firmly. He suggested that Fulgrim's obsession with perfection made him predictable, that true mastery required freedom rather than rigid technique. The tension was palpable, a duel was implied, promised in everything but actual words, hanging in the air between them. But the heresy interrupted before anything could be resolved. Fulgrim fell to Slaanesh, becoming a demon prince. The Khan went into the Webway and disappeared. That confrontation, that promised duel, has been waiting for resolution for 10,000 years in universe, and decades in real-world publication time. Narrative depths like this don't just disappear. Games Workshop doesn't set up confrontations between Primarchs and then forget about them. The duel between Fulgrim and the Khan has been promised since the triumph at Ullanor, and at some point that promise must be kept. When the Khan returns from the Webway, he'll be faster than he's ever been, faster than any other Primarch except maybe Sanguinius at his absolute peak. He'll have techniques that no one has seen before, movements that shouldn't be possible, strikes that come from angles that don't exist in three-dimensional space. He'll be Hanuman, the supreme destroyer of evil, the Monkey King who leapt across oceans and burned cities. He'll be trained by Harlequins, blessed by Cegorach, carrying 10,000 years of preparation for one specific purpose. And he'll finally get his duel with Fulgrim. This is personal on multiple levels. For Cegorach, it's revenge against Slaanesh for destroying the Eldar pantheon. For the Khan, it's vindication of his legion's doctrine, proof that freedom and mobility trump rigid perfection. For the Imperium, it's striking a blow against one of Chaos's greatest champions. The fight would be speed versus perfection, freedom versus excess, laughter versus corruption, the White Monkey versus the Phoenician. It's a confrontation that has been building since the Great Crusade, and when it finally happens, when the Khan's blade finds Fulgrim's throat, it will reshape the entire setting. Slaanesh will be weakened, Cegorach's plan will advance, the Ranadandra's new ending will become possible, and the promise made at Ullanor will finally be fulfilled. So where do all these threads meet? These storylines aren't running in parallel, they're converging towards the same point, the same moment, the same catastrophic event that will determine the galaxy's fate. Russ's quest, Valdor's sacrifice, Corax and Janus' roles, the Khan's training, Cegorach's machinations, the Wolftime, and the Ranadandra. They're all pieces of the same massive narrative that Games Workshop has been constructing for years. The sequence of events could unfold something like this. Leman Russ finds the Tree of Life deep in the warp after years of searching. He stands before it ready to make his bargain with Tzeentch, ready to trade everything for the knowledge to save the Emperor. At the last moment, Corvus Corax and Janus arrive. They've been tracking him, following his trail through the Immaterium. They intervene before Russ can seal the deal. There's probably a fight with demons, maybe a philosophical debate about sacrifice and necessity. But ultimately they stop him from giving Tzeentch his soul. Russ loses his eye anyway, the price Yggdrasil demands, but he keeps himself intact. He gains the knowledge he sought without becoming Tzeentch's puppet. Meanwhile, Constantin Valdor has been pursuing the same goal through different methods. The Apollonian path rather than the Dionysian. When Russ returns from the warp, they reunite, the wielders of the twin spears, working together at last, combining their opposite approaches to achieve what neither could accomplish alone, despite the fact Valdor does not have his spear with him. But something goes wrong. Maybe it's a trap laid by Tzeentch, revenge for Russ escaping his clutches. Maybe it's part of Cegorach's larger plan, a necessary sacrifice to trigger the events that follow. Either way, Valdor dies. The Golden Guardian falls, struck down at the moment of potential victory, dying before he can see the Emperor restored. His death triggers the Wolftime. The prophecies of the Space Wolves come true. The end times begin. Chaos grows stronger as reality weakens. The Imperium fractures further under the pressure. The Great Rift widens. The galaxy burns. Russ returns to the Imperium properly now, emerging from the warp with Corax and Janus at his sides. He's no longer the brash executioner who burned Prospero. He's the Allfather, the one-eyed king bearing Gungnir, accompanied by his two ravens. The Space Wolves howl their welcome. Their Primarch has returned, just as he promised, at the galaxy's darkest hour. At roughly the same time, Jaghatai Khan emerges from the Webway. 10,000 years of training with the Harlequins have transformed him into something unprecedented. He moves faster than memory, strikes with precision that defies physics, laughs as he kills with joy of someone who has finally found worthy opponents. The Harlequins have given him everything they know. Cegorach has blessed him with divine purpose. He's ready for this role. Russ leads the Imperium's counterattack against Chaos. He's no longer just a warrior. He's a general, a king, a prophet who knows what must be done. He uses the knowledge gained at the Tree of Life to begin the process of restoring the Emperor. But it requires sacrifice on a massive scale. It requires war unlike anything the galaxy has seen since the heresy. But Russ prosecutes that war with wisdom rather than rage, with calculated purpose rather than berserker fury. Somewhere in the chaos, the Khan fights Fulgrim. The duel promised at Ullanor finally happens. Speed versus perfection, and freedom versus excess. The White Monkey versus the Phoenician. The fight echoes across the Immaterium itself, felt by every psyker in the galaxy. And when the Khan's blade finds its mark, when Fulgrim falls, Slaanesh screams. The Dark Prince is weakened. Cegorach's plans advance. The altered Ranadandra becomes possible. This is the Wolftime, Ragnarok, the Ranadandra. They're the same event viewed through different cultural and mythological lenses. The end times that must happen so the galaxy can be reborn. The fire that precedes renewal. The final battle that determines whether humanity and the Eldar survive or whether chaos consumes everything. So why does this theory work? Games Workshop doesn't do accidental mythology. When they have Russ take up a spear that clearly represents Gungnir, they mean something by it. When they create twin spears with opposing philosophical principles, they're building towards something. When they scatter Norse and Hindu mythological references throughout their lore, those references are signposts pointing toward a specific destination. The Norse mythology parallels for Russ are explicit, undeniable, and impossible to miss once you see them. He transformed from Thor to Odin in Wolfsbane, abandoning Mjolnir for Gungnir, trading reactive violence for contemplative wisdom. He's searching for Yggdrasil. He's going to sacrifice an eye for knowledge just like Odin did. He needs his ravens, and Games Workshop has positioned Corax and Janus perfectly to fill those roles. The connection between Valdor and Baldr is there in name, in the golden armor, in the twin spears, in the shared vision that sent both him and Russ on their quests. If Valdor is the brightest of the Emperor's servants, if he's golden and pure and perfect, then his death triggering the end times fits the Norse mythology pattern exactly. Corax and Janus as the two ravens makes perfect narrative sense. Corax is the physical scout, the warrior, the one who saved Russ at Yarent and will save him again at the Tree of Life. Janus is the spiritual guide, the mystic, the one who carries Magnus's regret and can prevent Russ from making Magnus's mistakes. Together they complete the Odin mythology while also resolving character arcs that have been waiting since the heresy. The Khan embodying Hanuman is brilliant precisely because it gives his storyline the same mythological weight as Russ's Odin arc. The Ramayana is as important to Hindu culture as Norse mythology is to Scandinavian culture. Having the Khan transform into the Monkey King, the supreme destroyer of evil, provides him with a narrative role that matches the other returning Primarchs in scope and significance. The duel with Fulgrim has been promised since Ullanor. It's one of the longest running unresolved narrative threads in the entire Heresy series. Having it finally happen with the Khan empowered by Harlequin training and Cegorach's blessing provides a payoff that's been building for decades of real-world time. Everything in this theory connects. Russ's quest connects to Valdor's quest. Valdor's death triggers the Wolftime. The Wolftime is part of the larger end times that include the Ranadandra. The Khan's role in the Ranadandra requires him to defeat Fulgrim. Cegorach's manipulation of the scattering set up the Khan to be his champion against Slaanesh. Every thread ties into every other thread. Nothing is isolated. Everything builds toward the same climactic moment. This is how Games Workshop tells stories. They plant seeds years in advance, maybe by accident. They drop hints across novels, codexes, and short stories. They build towards moments that feel both surprising and inevitable. And when you step back and examine all the pieces they've positioned, this theory is the only explanation that makes all of them make sense together. The mythological parallels are too precise. The character positioning is too deliberate. The unresolved narrative threads are too significant. Either this is what Games Workshop has been building towards, or they've accidentally created the appearance of building towards it, which seems unlikely given how careful they are with their continuity and foreshadowing. So how might the final scene play out? Leman Russ stands on Terra, one eye gone, wielding Gungnir, flanked by Corvus Corax and Janus. He's no longer the Wolf King, he's the All-Father now, the wise king the Imperium needs for the war that's coming. The Space Wolves have assembled from across the galaxy, every successor chapter, every Wolf Priest and Iron Priest, every Bloodclaw and Longfang. They howl for their Primarch. The Wolftime has arrived. Constantin Valdor is dead, the Golden Guardian fallen in the quest to save the Emperor. The Custodians mourn even as they prepare for war. His death has triggered the cascade of events that leads to the final confrontation. Everything he worked towards, everything he sacrificed has brought the Imperium to this moment. Elsewhere, Jaghatai Khan steps out of the Webway for the first time in 10,000 years. He's faster than lightning, faster than thought, moving through reality like it's something optional. The Harlequins have taught him everything they know. Cegorach has blessed him with purpose. He laughs as he strikes, joy in every movement, because this is what he was born to do. The White Scars rally to him, their lost Primarch returned at last. And behind them come the Harlequin troops ready to play their part in Cegorach's grand performance. These are the heroes of the end times, the Odin figure with his 2 ravens wielding wisdom earned through sacrifice, the Hanuman figure with the speed of gods and the laughter of the blessed. Together they represent the Imperium's last best hope, the mythological figures made real, stepping out of legend to fight the final war. And somewhere in the Webway, in the Black Library or perhaps in the space between thoughts, Cegorach laughs. The punchline to his greatest joke is about to land. Slaanesh thought it won when it murdered the Eldar pantheon, but the laughing god always has the last laugh. Always. The Wolftime, the Ranadandra, the age of the Allfather and the Monkey King. The end times that will decide whether the galaxy survives or falls. It's coming. The mythological architecture is too elaborate to be accidental. The narrative threads are too carefully positioned. The payoffs are too perfect. When it finally happens, when Russ returns with his ravens and the Khan emerges to face Fulgrim, we'll look back at these hints and realize Games Workshop was showing us this story the entire time. The mythology was always the map. We just needed to learn how to read it.